Hello, I'm Lorna and this is feeling far stranger than I ever would have imagined. I've thought about starting up a YouTube channel for quite a while. It's something I've thought about for years, but never really had the confidence to do it. But then something happened in my life known as PoTS, and that seemed to give me the push to do it, because what helped me most when I was kind of newly diagnosed was watching videos by other people who also suffer from PoTS, and so I thought I could start by sharing my own journey with PoTS and just see where it takes me really. In some ways, PoTS is a more recent thing for me, in the sense that now it's something that I know about, but in another sense it isn't such a recent thing, as I think the likelihood is that I've probably been suffering from it for years, but nobody knew what it was, or it was put down to other things. First of all, I suddenly realised it's only going to make sense if I explain a bit about what PoTS is, because most people don't know what it is. I didn't before I was told that I probably had it. I'm going to be looking at taking the information mainly from the NHS website and also the PoTS UK website, which kind of became my Bible when I found out that I had PoTS, and still is really. PoTS stands for postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. It's basically a dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. It's basically an abnormal increase in heart rate that occurs when a person is sitting up or standing up. And so, as I've said, PoTS is caused by dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system, and that's why it's also known as a condition of dysautonomia. And basically the autonomic nervous system is in charge of all bodily functions that we don't really have to think about. It's like sending messages from the brain to every part of your body. So it's in charge of like heart rate and blood pressure regulation, digestion, bladder control, sweating and stress response. It's the part of the body that produces the fight or flight response. So what happens in PoTS is basically with a normal person, when you sit or stand up, gravity pulls some of your blood down to your belly area and your hands and feet to help deal with that adjustment and posture, and your blood vessels will kind of narrow slightly and your heart rate increases slightly to maintain the blood flow to the heart while you sit or stand up and prevent the blood pressure from dropping. But in the case of PoTS, there's a dysfunction with this. So when you stand up, there's a drop in blood supply to the heart and brain, and the heart races to compensate for that, and that's what they mean by tachycardia, that your heart goes really, really fast. I wanted to talk a bit about the symptoms of PoTS, like how you might know if you have got it. The first symptom I'm going to talk about is dizziness, and this is a big one for me. PoTS causes a lot of lightheadedness and pre-syncope. That's kind of where you feel like you're about to faint, which happens quite often on a daily basis. It usually happens upon sitting up or standing up, or when you've stood up for quite a long time or stood still. There's like full fainting and blackouts, which I do experience. Palpitations, that's where you really notice your heartbeat, which I definitely do notice at times. Weirdly, usually when I'm trying to get to sleep, I think when everything else is quiet and you're not thinking of anything else, it's just where you become a bit more aware of your heartbeat, and sometimes it can feel like your heart has skipped a beat, which can be a bit disconcerting, but I guess you kind of get used to it, or I have. Tiredness or weakness, I've definitely noticed like just general muscle weakness when I have a PoTS flare up. I definitely can't seem to lift like heavy items that I used to have no trouble lifting at all. I can't lift things from the floor very easily. I think that's more due to the change in posture. And yeah, tiredness, like PoTS does cause fatigue, and I think the only reason I can find for that is that essentially your heart is working a lot harder just to function and do normal activities. Like, to give a bit of an idea, my heart rate on a good day would be 70 beats per minute lying flat, and then when I get up to sitting, it will kind of gradually work its way up to around 90 beats per minute, and that's good for me. And then if I sit for a longer period of time, then my heart rate will carry on rising, because PoTS symptoms can also be triggered by prolonged sitting. So yeah, if I sit for a long time, it might continue to rise to about around 120 beats per minute at the highest. It's what it was today, and it's quite an average day. But then when you stand up, the kind of test of whether you have PoTS is that your heart rate will increase by, I think it's something like at least 30 to 40 beats per minute within a few minutes of standing up. In my case, it seems to happen straight away and then continues to rise. So all the time you're stood up or walking around, my heart rate is usually well above 120 beats per minute, up to 140. That's quite normal for me for walking round. I kind of am in more trouble when it gets beyond that. So yeah, your heart's kind of doing a bit of a workout, because usually you would have to be running for your heart to be, or a normal person would have to be running in order for their heart to be going like at 140 beats per minute, whereas I would just be walking to the local shops. So often after kind of you've done anything, there is a period of fatigue. Brain fog, I've heard that kind of comes with chronic illness in general. Yes, I haven't mentioned that. I think so PoTS isn't a life-threatening condition, but it is a chronic condition. The symptoms obviously can be quite debilitating. I hope to do some more videos in talking about how PoTS affects my life and on a daily basis. The symptoms like shakiness, this can be true of me when my heart goes quite high. I've always had quite shaky hands, and I haven't really known why. Shortness of breath, like breathlessness. So yes, that does happen to me usually, just from walking a few meters even, or from standing up. I have noticed that even when doing this video, or just speaking in general, that I have to take a bit more pauses if I'm sat up and talking. Symptom of PoTS is chest pain. I find that it tends to happen kind of after quite a strong PoTS episode where my heart's gone quite fast. It's more like after the event, and I wouldn't say it's a really bad chest pain. It hasn't ever really worried me. In the past I put it down to anxiety because it felt similar, but I noticed I seemed to get it when I wasn't feeling anxious at all. It just feels like a very slight ache. Sometimes it kind of is more of a throb, and it tends to be just kind of in the middle of my chest. And again, I think it's just from your heart kind of working so hard that it almost feels a bit tired. PoTS also causes digestion problems, which is looking to be a problem for me. It's because all your blood is kind of racing to your heart, so it doesn't go to other organs, and so that means that they don't work as well. So it's quite common for people with PoTS to be told that they've got IBS or similar symptoms. It causes poor sleep. My experience of it is that it's more like a poor quality of sleep, where sometimes you can feel as though you've had the right amount of sleep but you don't feel refreshed for it. And sometimes it has woken me up from my heart going quite fast and getting palpitation, that actually has woken me up. So yeah, it's not that great because tiredness makes PoTS worse, and so it's a bit of a vicious circle in that way. There's visual problems, and in my experience it's mainly blurred vision when my symptoms are becoming quite bad. To the digestion issues, PoTS can cause bladder problems, which has also been sadly a problem for me. It's a bit embarrassing, but it shouldn't really need to be. It's just a similar kind of scenario where all your blood's going to your heart, so your other organs aren't working so properly. Lots of triggers that can make PoTS symptoms a lot worse. For example, excessive heat, that has a big impact, certainly for me. A large meal can make symptoms worse. This is something that kind of made me notice that something wasn't right. It tends to happen more if you have quite a large meal with quite a lot of carbohydrates, that you might feel quite unwell. I think I did touch on this a bit earlier, but tiredness and stress can make PoTS symptoms worse. I've definitely noticed that when I've been more stressed, I tend to have a flare-up. PoTS is often misdiagnosed as anxiety or put down as panic attacks. That's something that happens quite a lot throughout the diagnostic process, and I also suffer from quite significant mental health problems, and I think that's why in the past it's been put down to my mental health when I've had physical symptoms. It's important to note that PoTS and anxiety, they do tend to be linked, in the PoTS isn't caused by anxiety, but the way I would explain it is that anxiety can make it a lot worse, because if you get anxious, then your heart rate will go up, and then on top of that, if you were to stand up, then your PoTS symptoms would be a lot worse because your heart will go even higher. And also, I think it's important to note that PoTS can be quite a anxiety provoking illness, and so it can be frightening. So when you're, because you may feel as though you're about to faint at any moment, and I think it's quite natural to feel quite anxious. So yes, that's how I would explain it. Other things that make PoTS worse, deconditioning and prolonged bed rest. This isn't something I've particularly experienced. Also alcohol, again, not something I've experienced, but apparently because it dilates the blood vessels. I don't drink alcohol at all and never have anyway. Exercise can make symptoms a lot worse. It's finding a little bit of a balance, because some exercise can improve PoTS symptoms. For example, kind of lighter exercise, because if you improve like your leg muscles, then that can improve your circulation to your legs, and that can improve the condition. But I would say probably like cardio, quite extreme exercise would be too much. And yeah, that's something that I've noticed, because I used to be able to exercise an awful lot more than I can now. So what causes PoTS? Really, nobody knows. It's something that some teenagers may develop, and then it will just go. That's how it can be for some people. Then it can just come and then improve by itself. Sometimes PoTS is a secondary condition to another physical health condition. Like I know it's often comes with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. As far as I know, I don't have like a primary health condition, so I assume that in my case PoTS is my primary health condition. It's also linked to kind of other autoimmune diseases. Also quite commonly occurs alongside chronic fatigue syndrome, and I don't think that's where I sit, but I do know others for whom that is the case, and I could see that maybe it has been true of me in the past. Something that I have noticed in terms of what the kind of people are like bodily physique, who are diagnosed with PoTS is, well, it has been found to affect a lot more women than men, and usually from the age of 15 to 30, so quite young women. I'm 27, so I think I fall right in the middle of that category. But I have noted, this isn't true of everyone, but it tends to be young women who are quite tall or with quite long legs. I'm not extremely tall, I'm 5'8", but people often think I look taller because I've got really long legs, and I think it must have something to do with PoTS, because the way I see it is it's all kind of linked to gravity, and if your heart is quite a long way from the ground, that must have an impact. So I suppose it can be genetic in terms of your overall physique. It's thought that PoTS could also be linked to inheriting a faulty gene that causes too much of the fight or flight hormone. I think this could be relevant because I also suffer from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which does involve the fight or flight hormone. So yes, I think they probably are connected.